Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Jasleen Kaur, and I'm a researcher at SikhRI. And I'm joined here today by Ivraj Singh to talk about Sidak for our Sidak Impact series. Guru Fateh, Ivraj, how are you?
Guru Fateh, Jasleen. I'm doing good. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. I think if we can just jump into it, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from, and what your Sidak history is, what track history you have at Sidak?
Yeah, definitely. So hello everyone. My name is Ivraj Singh. My day job is that I am a software engineer. I was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. So probably one of the more defining features of my personal Sikh experience has been growing up in the Midwest. And yeah, the first time I attended Sidak was actually the virtual event that got held during COVID. I think it may have been like 2019 or 2020. But then the first time I went in person was just this last summer in 2022.
Great. And what track did you end up taking?
Yeah, and I took SikhRI 101.
Okay. And why? I know you have a little bit of an interesting history, so I'm not going to ask you why you chose the track, but maybe what about the track appealed to you once you started would be a better topic.
I think, oftentimes as a Sikh growing up in America, it's very difficult to feel like, oh, I know enough about SikhRI. I personally came from the Wisconsin area, so fortunately we had a Gurdwara near us where we were growing up. We would go to classes there, we'd go to some camps here and there across the country, and, you kind of, take in information by osmosis. But at no point do you ever feel like, okay, sweet, I got the foundational knowledge I need to know to embark on my Sikh journey. So what I loved about SikhRI 101 was just how comprehensive the track was. I mean, we just covered so much material during the 2 weeks. And another incredible thing about the course was the approach that the presenters had in trying to give a very comprehensive perspective. Presenters were very open about hey, this is our perspective on a particular issue, but here are some other perspectives you might consider that other Sikhs in the month might bring forward. So I loved how comprehensive it was, not just from the amount of content it covered, but also from the honesty which a lot of presenters had about the different perspectives that other Sikhs might bring up as you talk about certain issues.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard from some people who have not even started their Sikh journeys, who come to Sidak, that that was the reason why they came, and then other people who I don't know how else to put this other than to put it as people who have religious baggage, or they have a particular practice, they have particular beliefs, they come from a particular sort of sub tradition of how they do their Sikhi, and they come, and so much of the process for them that might be a little bit painful is dealing with the understanding that there are different perspectives. So it's an interesting sort of environment in which you get what you need, I think. And so we've had years where we have a lot of people who have never touched the Guru Granth Sahib, have never felt empowered to sit behind the Guru Granth Sahib and literally touch it. And we've had years where we've had a lot of people who really feel comfortable in their practice, but maybe haven't had to have conversations with people who disagree with them. And I think that's true for everyone. I think Sidak does a good job of kind of sort of, making you be a little bit more compassionate than maybe you otherwise would be in other situations. And you are interacting with a lot of different people who come from different understandings of their Sikhi in different places in their own journeys. So I think that really resonates with me, what you said.
Yeah, well, building off of that, I think one of the kind of more unique aspects of Sidak that you don't really get at a lot of other camps or conferences is that diversity of the bunch representation. Because, my sisters and I, we went to a couple camps growing up. But, normally you'll find at a lot of these camps is that there's a particular vibe, a particular perspective. Sometimes it's not even intentional, it's just a consequence of, the demographics of what Sangat members come to certain camps. But the thing you do lose out on is the appreciation of the diversity of perspectives, the appreciation for the diversity of approaches in Sikhi. So I think, a lot of people might look at Sidak and say like, oh, wow, there's like, a 3HO Sikh from Mexico and then a Nahung Singh from like Toronto. Like, how is that conversation going to go? But that's actually the strength of Sidak is, you'd assume that would be a contentious situation, or you assume that people won't agree. But actually what was very inspiring is seeing, such diverse Sikh backgrounds come in. A lot of people are actually having like very constructive conversations. And yeah, like it was just like a piece of learning that you just cannot get at other camps or other spaces.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah, I think, okay, so like backtracking a little bit, because I did talk to your sister yesterday. And so we talked a little bit about like the process that a lot of people go through of like trying to convince themselves to even like fill out the application. And I know you're two different people, so maybe you didn't struggle with that, but like what made you decide to apply ultimately, and what was kind of going through your head beforehand, and maybe even like leading up to Sidak? Because for me it was like a lot of anxiety, but yeah, I just wanted to ask that.
Yeah. Yeah, there were days where Simranjeet, my sister, would be like, oh my God, I'm too nervous, I'm not going to do it. And I would like literally have to sit her down and be like, just fill out the app, just send it. What's the worst thing that could happen? They'll just tell you to apply again next year. For myself, I didn't have a lot of nervousness around whether I should apply. I think for me, kind of at the time in my life, I was based out of LA at the time I applied, and there are, a fair number of Sikhs out there. But I definitely felt like I was missing a Sangat that, I could talk to and explore, my Sikhi with. And that's kind of like what I was looking to get out of Sidak. So that's why I applied. I didn't feel too nervous about the actual application process. It was lengthy, but, just went through with it, sent it in, and heard back.
Okay. All right, so you were nervous, that's fine.
Yeah.
But okay, so then I guess what did you expect you would get out of it? And was there anything that like was unexpected about that experience? Because I'm thinking about, I guess when I went the second time, I was 22, so I was younger than you were when you came, but like I think I was expecting more of a quote unquote camp environment, even though I didn't really grow up going to camps at all. And even though like it's constantly said like Sidak is not a camp, it's a leadership retreat, I think I still was worried about that kind of sort of like more didactic way of interacting with Sikhi, of like, this is the way it is. And like, what do you know? Like, I thought somebody would look at me and be like, what do you know? So I think I had that expectation of it being kind of like a competitive and sort of tense environment for some reason. And I think probably a lot of that was just because I was dealing with my own like struggling with like belonging and things like that. But yeah, I guess like it doesn't have to be as extreme as it was for me, but like what were you expecting, and what was maybe surprising about the experience once you were there?
Yeah. Well, it's funny how you say like the age you applied kind of influenced what you expected. So I went for the first time when I was either 25 or 26. And I actually kind of expected almost like a more conference like sort of setup. More people would be, networking or something like that. So I think maybe just given my age, that's kind of what I assumed going in. But what kind of surprised me about the setup, well, there was a lot of workshops, a lot of classes. Those I did expect. What I did not expect is the amount of growth and learning that happened in the off hours. So just sitting around in the Langar hall, talking to Sikhs from like very different walks of life, or late night jam sessions in the Diwan hall or something like that, learning from people different styles of Kirtan, for example. All of that stuff I didn't really expect, because I kind of had this image of like, oh, it's going to be a conference, we're going to sit in the workshops, and then we're going to exchange contact infos, and just be kind of the sanitized, more professional sort of thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think I also, and maybe it's because I'm like a little bit more I don't know, I'm not super like open, I think, when I first meet new people. And so I think I also was kind of like, I'm gonna see these people and I'm never gonna talk to them again. And like certainly
exactly.
nothing is gonna happen that's gonna like make me have any kind of community that comes out of this. And every single year, whether I've been at Sidak as a Sidaker or as a TA or as a facilitator, I always find like a couple more people who like get added to that larger Sangat. And like I watched so many people leave Sidak with like friends that they end up like traveling with, friends that they end up like becoming super close to, and like all these other discussions come out of that. Like we have the Gurbani Vichar discussion that happened this year, where like people are just getting together to talk about Bani because they like want to, right? Like that kind of stuff, I think you don't necessarily expect, because it's not like written on the website, but it's like that's
right.
That's the most kind of life-changing thing, because we talk so much about Sangat, and I think a lot of times we talk about Sangat and we don't really know what it is we're talking about. And we just think like Sangat is just like other Sikhs, like any old Sikh will do, and we'll just get together and that's Sangat. And it's like, well, is your Sangat compassionate? Is your Sangat non-judgmental? Is your Sangat like, are these people that you feel like you can be vulnerable with? Like these are all things that maybe we think we can't find, or we don't know that that's like something that's possible. And I just find that like that happens every year, where I'm like watching people form these like smaller Sangats that they just carry with them. And it's really lovely to see. And like I've personally experienced that. So that's really, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I guess like sort of going off of that, I said this yesterday, but like, what is a core memory of Sidak for you? Like, it doesn't have to be in the classroom, it can be outside of the classroom. I think Simi said stargazing. That's pretty up there for me too. But just like something that like comes to mind when you think of this past summer and your experience there.
Yeah, I think well, stargazing is definitely up there. That was a favorite. When I think of Sidak, probably the first memory that comes to me is actually my Sandhya sessions. So my TA was Vineet Banerjee, and it was absolutely incredible. So for context, I was in the SikhRI 101 track. Part of SikhRI 101 is doing a in-depth reading of Asakivar, and we break out into these small groups doing Sandhya sessions to practice both, proper pronunciation as well as just a real in-depth understanding of every single line. These groups are, one TA, usually like 6 or 7 people. And what was most memorable about these sessions is we had such a diverse group of people coming in with like different pieces of understanding, and being able to riff with them and ask honest questions. That was honestly one of the biggest things, is just being able to ask questions in an environment where, someone's not going to whip their head around and be like, what? You don't know that? Just having so many fond memories of, laughing with that Sandhya session group while also growing, learning from them. That's usually what I think about first when I think of Sidak.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know. I'm jealous that I never got to do Sandhya with Vineet. that would be. Okay, so going off of that, something that we talk about a lot when we talk about like the first week of Sidak is that we say it's kind of a painful period of unlearning for a lot of Sidakers. And I wanted to ask you like what it is that maybe you felt like you had to unlearn in your time at Sidak, because I know for me, the year that I came to Sidak as a facilitator for the first time, I was super nervous and I missed my flight, and I ended up staying with one of our volunteers who wears this thought, and we were talking about like, you know, public perceptions of us based on our physical appearances. And I had this thing in my head about like, based on the way I look, people will think I don't belong. And she was like, don't you think that that same exact issue is something that people like us deal with all the time too? Like when people look at somebody who has like a more visible external identity that is like Sikh, or they look at somebody and they're like visibly Amritdhari, there are expectations that are put on them too. And I was like, oh, like I just never had thought of it that way. So I always like think about how it was really good that I missed my flight that year. Because when I came to Sidak the next day, I saw so many people who were like visibly Sikh in the way that like would have intimidated me actually if I hadn't had that conversation with this particular person the night before. And so for that year, like so much of my unlearning had to be like the same way that I don't want people like assuming things about me based on the way I look, assuming things about like my SikhRI. I didn't want to like assume things about other people based on the way that they look, you know, like it feels very simple, but it actually did require a lot of kind of conscious effort. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask about what you experienced in that way. Like what ways were you maybe challenged? What things did you have to kind of work through?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing I had to unlearn or deconstruct was this assumption around discipline and rigidity in spirituality. For myself, like I mean, my friends know I'm, you know, rather logically oriented person, ask a lot of questions. But for me, I kind of had this assumption that the more spiritual you are, the more rigid you are. You know, you wake up at exactly Amrit Vela, you knock out all your nitnem, you know, and you're just, you know, doing things by the book down the checklist. I mean, for me, Inni Banji's sessions were actually the most mind-blowing or eye-opening, because I was like, oh, like this whole love thing is very interesting. I never gave that much thought. And it really kind of broke my perception of like, oh, well, maybe the way forward or the way to grow is not always to become more rigid and more disciplined. Sometimes you actually have to grow your mind in other ways. And what I realized is actually that discipline or that rigidity, it's not necessarily what was more spiritual. It's just what I was familiar with. It was my own assumptions about like what I need to do. And lo and behold, like oftentimes you assume what you're good at is like the thing that is like the right way to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like logical or more disciplined or rigid, so I'm like, oh, that must, you know, be the right way. So yeah, no, any Banji sessions on love and, you know, reading and interacting with a lot of Bhai Nandlalji's Barney was very, very impactful and eye-opening for me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's funny because your sister said the same thing in a different way. But I think the Bhai Nandlal ghazals, now that they've been mentioned twice, I will just say like those are on the SikhRI website. A plug for a second podcast is Damanpreet Singh and Inni Kaur's translations are on the website. Please listen to them if you haven't yet. But those really stuck with a lot of people, and I think it's because there is such like unabashed intimacy in those poems that I think maybe we're not comfortable with and we're not familiar with. And maybe it does have something to do with this idea of like rigidity, or like this understanding that like misunderstanding that like to be devoted means to be kind of like, I am devoted in this way, and it's kind of tamped down, and there's nothing that's kind of vulnerable in a way that feels like, I mean, Simi said this yesterday, that feels like you're intruding. Yeah, and I hadn't ever heard them speak about those compositions in person, so that was a really like core memory for me at Sidak as well. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess my last question is kind of, I know I usually say like, how did Sidak change your life? But like maybe instead, like what do you feel like you're still carrying with you from Sidak? And I think what I've said before is like, we talk about like Shabad chiseling us, we talk about like Shabad working on us, we talk about like these experiences continuing to change us in ways that we maybe don't necessarily actively see all the time. But now that we're almost a year out, which is crazy, what do you feel like you've carried with you from Sidak, and what makes you want to come back?
Yeah, I think probably like the two big things I'm walking away from Sidak with are firstly just an appreciation for the diversity in Sikhi. I think, like I said earlier, growing up in the Midwest, you just don't see a lot of Sikhs. You might be out and about and, you see one other Sikh and you're like, oh my God, like, look, I see a star. Versus, my sister and I were in Surrey for the first time, and we're like, literally every block, we're like, oh my God, it's a star. Oh, there's another star. Look at that BB. And like our Masi who lives there had to be like, quiet down, you're embarrassing us. So just seeing that diversity and appreciating that. And then the second thing I would say is like the sangat that you meet, like the friends you make. As a kid, oftentimes the first time you like hang out with other Sikhs as a kid can be very impactful in America, because you want to be around people who look like you, and you finally meet people who look like you, and your mind is blown, like, oh my God, there's like other Sikhs. But once you kind of get past that, then you want like, oh well, I want to find people who actually don't just look like me, like you were saying earlier, I just don't want any Sikh, not any Sikh will do, but I want someone who actually even shares my spiritual experiences, can interact with me, and talk about Sikhi and explore Sikhi, as a spiritual path. And that's like kind of probably the most incredible thing I'm walking away from Sidak with. Like, not a week goes by where I don't interact with friends I made at Sidak, whether that be on a phone call or in a group chat, and not a week goes by where we're not actually talking about Sikhi. Like, I'll have friends who are sending me shabads. I'll have friends who will be hopping on, Gurbani Vichar Zoom calls and meetings. So yeah, no, it's been an incredible blessing to be able to, have Sangat members that, not only look like you, but like also share that spiritual path.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. I agree. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I know I'm a facilitator, but I do feel like every year that I like leave Sidak, I've like learned something new, and then I continue to like learn from the people that have attended as Sidakers, and from the other facilitators, of course, but like it's just such a special thing. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you. Thank you for talking to me about your experience. I will probably see you this summer at Sidak as well. And for those of you who are listening, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me at jasleen.kaur@sikhri.org, or check out sikhri.org/Sidak, and that's where you'll also find the application. Thank you again, Ivraj.
Yes, of course. No, it's my pleasure.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You were listening to SikhCast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.